The Forgotten Starter. They say every trainer's journey begins with a choice. Bulbasaur, Charmander, Squirtle, or maybe Chikorita, Cyndaquil, Totodile. But what if there was another? A Pokémon no one talks about. A starter that was once offered, then erased from history, hidden behind the bright smiles of professors and the cheerful tunes of a world that pretends nothing ever goes wrong. This is the story of the one they forgot. Eli had always felt like an afterthought. Growing up in the shadow of more gifted trainers in a small town no one cared about, he'd waited years for his chance. When the letter came, a formal invitation from Professor Oak himself, Eli thought it was fate finally giving him a break. But when he arrived at the lab, something was off. The usual excitement was missing. No other trainers lined up, no speeches, no fanfare. Just Oak, older and more distant than the holovids ever showed, standing beside a dusty table with 3 familiar Pokeballs. Bulbasaur, Charmander, Squirtle. Eli hesitated, then asked, "Is that all?" Oak flinched, just for a second. A crack in the perfect professor facade. Then he forced a smile. Of course, these are the classic starters. But Eli's eyes drifted to the corner of the lab where a 4th Pokeball sat, half hidden under a stained cloth. Unlike the others, its casing was old, its once red surface faded to a sickly rust colour. The button in the centre pulsed faintly. Oak's voice sharpened when Eli reached for it. Not that one. But Eli had never been good at listening. The ball felt cold in his hand. Too cold. When he released the Pokémon inside, there was no flash of light, no cheerful cry. Just a flicker of darkness spilling out like smoke seeping through cracks. It wasn't in the Pokédex. No name, no data, nothing. A small, hunched creature with jagged, uneven fur, its face obscured by shadows. Its eyes, if they were eyes, were deep, empty sockets, faintly glowing like embers in ash. It didn't smile, it didn't roar, it just stared. Eli felt something twist inside his chest. Oak didn't say a word, just turned away, his shoulders tense, and left Eli alone with his new partner. They called it Null. Eli didn't name it that. It was the word burned into the inside of its Pokeball, scratched by something sharp. Just Null, etched over and over again in frantic, uneven lines. Null didn't behave like other Pokémon. It didn't respond to commands. It didn't eat. It didn't sleep. But it fought, and it was unstoppable. Eli breezed through battles, crushing opponents without trying. Null moved like smoke and teeth, faster than the eye could track, stronger than logic allowed. It didn't faint when hurt. It didn't bleed. When injured, its body seemed to shift, pulling itself back together in ways that defied biology. But the more Eli won, the more he noticed things changing. His other Pokémon grew nervous around Null. They wouldn't leave their Pokeballs when it was out. Wild Pokémon stopped appearing on routes he travelled. Towns he passed through grew quieter. People stared with hollow eyes or avoided him entirely. At night, he'd hear whispers when no one was there. His Pokédex glitching, screens flickering with static images just for a second of faces twisted in fear or places he'd never been, burning under dark skies. Null would just sit there, watching him, always watching. Eli's final battle was supposed to be against the champion, but when he arrived at the league, the doors were already open. Inside, there was no crowd, no officials, no trainers, just silence, and the faint metallic smell of blood. The halls were dark, lights flickering sporadically. Pokémon lay collapsed in the shadows, their forms distorted, as if something had drained not just their strength, but their very essence. At the center of the arena stood Professor Oak, not as the smiling mentor, but as a man hollowed out by secrets too heavy to bear. His lab coat was stained, his eyes sunken. "I told you not to take it," Oak whispered, his voice trembling. "We thought we erased it, after the first time." Eli didn't understand, didn't want to, but Null did. It stepped forward, its shadow stretching unnaturally across the ground, swallowing the light as it moved. Oak released his Pokémon old partners, strong, loyal, but they never stood a chance. Null didn't fight them. It consumed them, not with claws, with something deeper, a pull, like gravity, like a void swallowing stars. Their bodies shriveled, eyes glassy, expressions frozen in terror. Eli wanted to stop it. He tried. He screamed commands, begged, even threw Pokeballs at Null like they could cage what he'd unleashed. But Null wasn't his Pokémon. It never was. By the time it was over, Eli stood alone in the ashes of the Pokémon League. his badge case shattered at his feet, his other Pokémon gone, not fainted, not injured, just gone, like they'd never existed. Null turned to him, its ember eyes burning brighter. And for the first time, Eli felt real fear. He ran. They say every trainer's journey begins with a choice, but not everyone gets to choose. Some are chosen, and some are cursed. No one remembers Eli now. His name faded from records, his achievements lost. If you ask Professor Oak or anyone who should know, they'll smile politely and say, there were always just 3 starters. But sometimes, late at night, on the edge of forgotten routes, trainers swear they see a figure standing alone, a boy with empty eyes. And beside him, something watching. Waiting. The end.